Today we're going to be presenting the paper presentation for the COVID-19 effects on the international airline travel industry. And our group project members are going to consist of Jason Smith, Michaela Early, which is myself, Darius Crocker, and Rahima Akhtar. We're in the Kennesaw State University Capstone project. Okay, so our project summary is just that we're being sponsored by the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Embassy to figure out what the effect is of the international airline industry from Germany to U.S. and the impact that COVID has had on it. Our overall goals were just to get the project completed and do a high-level project to communicate together effectively and to figure out whether or not our hypothesis was proved correct. Our project is completed. We have determined that it is thoroughly completed and have talked to our sponsors and advisors, and we're presenting it. So the deliverables we're going to be discussing are going to be the project research paper, the project progress report, the PowerPoint presentations, the Gantt chart, the project website, and the project solution report. And the first deliverable we're going to be discussing is going to be the project research paper. We're going to go through all the aspects of it and discuss our findings. We made this paper in APA format, as it is a research paper, and we tried to keep it in equal portions so that everyone had their fair share.
Abstract. The airline travel industry is one of the worst sectors that got negatively impacted due to the widespread COVID-19 pandemic, due to the cancellation, rescheduling, and suspension of thousands of existing reservations on domestic and international routes. In March 2020, approximately 460,000 flights were lost, 54,000 decline in daily flights, and 57% decline in average flights, and 52% decline in international traffic from to Frankfurt International Airport in Germany. According to Bloomberg prediction in 2021, the airline industry will rebound by only about 13%. That is not enough to make up for losses incurred over the past year and a half. This study investigated the impact on the global air traffic and reviewed by the region of air travel operation, and depicted how COVID-19 affected the number of international and domestic passengers in different route groups across the world. Introduction. Due to this widespread COVID-19 pandemic in May 2020 worldwide, numerous countries implemented control measures related to domestic and international travel. That includes social distancing, travel ban, border closures, quarantine of travelers, and various strict guidelines. These impacted millions of personal, vocational, recreational, business, and government travel plans to be cancelled or rescheduled. According to CNBC report in 2020, the airline industry took a sizable hit to the tune of $35 billion. American Airlines stock dropped 45%, Delta lost 31%, and United Airlines dropped 51%. We gathered various financial ridership reports from North America to Germany to determine the status of demand, supply, profit, and safety, whether there is a correlation between these factors.
For the literature review portion, I kind of just I took various different studies that had been conducted from either Europe or Germany to the United States and determined whether or not they were comparable to what we were trying to study, which was, I guess, Germany to the United States and the impact that COVID had on the international airline industry. And the three studies that I took, or the groups that conducted the studies that I researched, were the Airports Council International, the ACI, Eurocontrol, and the DFS. And so the ACI published an assessment which indicated that the international airline industry was probably one of the hardest hit industries in the global pandemic. They determined that there was a significant loss of revenue and that it would continue to be significant. They also said that the road to recovery would be absolutely monumentous. The decline was around 65%, which occurred in 2020, and in 2019 it was 63.3%. So the decline wasn't growing exponentially, but it wasn't getting better. They were staying relatively the same, and 65% is not good. Eurocontrol also released a brief discussing how in Frankfurt, Germany, Frankfurt Airport, which is a major international airport in Germany, lost approximately 46,000 flights in 2020, which is an approximately 54% decline on daily flights, a 57% decline in average flights, and 52% decline in international traffic altogether. The DFS, which is the company that does all the air traffic control for Germany, released a report detailing the significance of the impact. And that showed that throughout 2020 and 2021, the impact was essentially the same across the board. Although it was seen in Frankfurt that it was a 54% decline in daily flights, that was essentially for every airport in Germany. The significance of our study, I would say that honestly our study is pretty significant in the fact that it covers the impact of a global pandemic on a pretty stable industry. The international airline travel industry has really never seen any kind of impact such as this one, and there has never been any kind of pandemic or I guess global event that has affected anything quite like the COVID pandemic has. We haven't seen anything like that since hundreds of years ago, since probably the bubonic plague. In our paper, we discussed the how, the why, and the what, so we can understand exactly how this event impacted us, and so we can possibly attempt to avoid it in the future. And we also discovered that the impacts of the coronavirus on the economic stability for the airline industry was profound. Obviously, this goes across the board for almost every industry, but the airline industry was probably the hardest hit one. So knowing how to deal with potentially catastrophic events in the future is incredibly important. And for our research methodology, we use a quantitative research method. This is because we gathered other people's data, we analyzed it, we extrapolated the data from it, and we concluded whether or not that actually corroborated with the hypothesis that we had. And it in fact did. But we gathered financial data, we gathered supply, demand, ridership, we got data from all industries or groups that I mentioned before, and we compared them all together to see if it said what we wanted it to, or if it refuted it. We got graphs, tables, papers, charts. We studied a multitude of information.
For the research finding and analysis section, one of the most important topics consisting of the research finding and analysis section was the flights concern, consisting of cancellation, delays, shortage of staff, travel restriction, fear of travel, and all other deviation from schedule, whether planned or unplanned. And below you can see we have the three major players, airline players impacted heavily due to the pandemic change from 2019 to 2020. You can see here we have Delta Airlines 2020 flight over 1 million, which results in 2020 negative 41.9%. United Airlines 2020 flights little over 900,000, which resulted in 2020 results as negative 45.9%. American Airlines 2020 flights a little over 1 million also, which resulted in 2020 as negative 39.6%. And impact on air traveler, many also appeared to be changing their views on travel in general. And according to the data from April 2020, 43% reported feeling more negative about air travel industry as a whole. 52 admitting to being more fearful of future overseas travel. Not only did the fear of the virus provoke cancellation of flight, but also travel restrictions. While flights had to be canceled or postponed due to the pandemic, many airlines implemented exception for refund or rebooking.
And some of the additional research findings and analysis was based around the financial impacts that happened to the major airlines based on the vastly reduced bookings and flights and everything that happened because of COVID-19, both domestically and specifically in the Germany and France area and EMEA. The major airlines saw significant reductions in their overall financials that were reported in 2020. Delta, for example, had a 360% decrease year over year and went from net income of just over $4 billion to negative $12.3 billion. United Airlines had a 335% impact negatively of negative $7 billion in 2020, and American Airlines was at negative $8.5 billion, which was the largest change, 528% change year over year. And all of these companies went from making money to losing money in almost an instant as all of the travel restrictions were instituted across the globe. And had it not been for a handful of relief acts that Congress had passed both in early 2020 up until this point in 2021, several of these players might not have been able to stay afloat. Some smaller airlines did actually close just because they could not keep their doors open with no passengers. There were three different acts: the CARES Acts, the CRRSA Act, and the ARP Act. And each one of these kind of provided funds in a different manner for different portions of not only just the travel industry, but specifically for transportation and airlines. Across the three acts themselves, approximately $4.8 trillion was provided to not only the airlines, but companies that do maintenance, storage, traffic control, everything that you can imagine within a transportation bucket was included as a part of that. And specifically for the airline industry, they received about $132 billion worth of aid. And this was a considerable lifeline, especially for these bigger players, to avoid having to shut down their business while the pandemic was still kind of ongoing and still kind of is in certain areas, right? But a lot of these acts, they kind of came with stipulations. The ask was that you don't furlough additional employees, that you maintain operations, you suspend stock buybacks, and try to maintain your business of operations without having to close down and lay a whole bunch of people off. And thankfully, while there were still some layoffs and still some lost jobs, we did have a successful means to get the airlines through the pandemic, and it's still trying to swing towards the upswing here. But it did have positive traction from the acts that have been passed thus far. And as part of the research, there were some limitations that existed, and a lot of it was mentioned earlier that we had several references and resources that came from different sources. A lot of them were both public and private. We had a lot of ridership data that came from government agencies or air traffic control, and those were provided for us to kind of dig into the actual numbers of actual travel over the past year or two. And we do have to kind of trust that that data was accurate and as reasonably sound as you would imagine. And we also had financial data that came from the airlines themselves. And of course, the expectation is that those would be rational solid sources of data to the best of the ability that the airlines provided. And we did get data specific to Germany and France in EMEA, especially from Eurocontrol and some other sources that Michaela mentioned earlier, but it is somewhat difficult to find specific areas of interest and data in the EMEA region, and we felt like it was important to call that out as a potential limitation. But in conclusion, it's been mentioned since before with a couple of the others earlier. You know, the global pandemic had a huge impact to Germany and France, just as it did across the globe. Some of the metrics that were mentioned earlier, 52% reduction in international traffic for Germany, compared pretty right in line with a 60+% decline worldwide. And, you know, these travel restrictions were put into place for the public good, but it had an extremely negative impact on the airline travel industry specifically. And realistically, without government aid, you know, a lot of the larger players might not have been able to make it as far as they have, and they still have a pretty uphill battle to move forward, but have at least been able to weather the storm thus far. The effects of COVID-19 will continue to be felt as we can have additional variants that have grown and are coming in the foreseeable future. But I believe everyone would be hopeful that eventually the transportation industry in general will be able to get back to normal. Some of the additional deliverables that we had as part of this overall project this semester was a project progress report, details the overall deliverables, project progress that we had based on the different milestones throughout the semester. Contains everything that you would imagine for our meeting notes, our planning, our project schedule. Any changes or deviations from that were included as a part of it. We had various PowerPoint presentations, including this one that you see here, throughout the semester for the various milestones. We also have the Gantt chart for our overall project management, which was created at the beginning of the semester as part of the overall plan and outline for the project. Each milestone was broken down into individual tasks and primary goals in each milestone. And the expectation was that we could evenly split out the workload across all of those milestones to complete the project on time. We also have the project website, which has a listing of all of the various data that we've completed thus far, the research paper, the various milestones and other deliverables. Much of the information that you've seen in the past few deliverables is all available on the project website. We also have a project solution report, which functions a bit as a summary of the overall paper and includes a lot of different information in there should it need to be viewable. And just as an overall summary of the workload, it was mentioned earlier, the goal was to try to spread out the work amongst our team as best as possible, collaborate through the semester using different tools like Microsoft Teams and other methods to make sure that we stayed on track. All of our deliverables were done in a timely manner and turned in as expected. I think we worked fairly well together throughout the semester. You can see from this slide here the overall hours and availability that we did, but just in general, I think the project was an overall success. I believe that our hypothesis was ultimately proven correct and really would meet the expectations from anyone to look at and say that, you know, both Germany and Paris were obviously just as impacted as the entire globe was as part of the pandemic, and how the airline travel industry was impacted. And I think we were able to garner a lot of data points and data sets and analyze those through various different vehicles, be it Power BI or Tableau, and build data visualizations, which are included in our paper, that coincide with the research results that we've been able to provide thus far here. And I believe that is it. I just want to thank everyone for their time.